Okay, please.
Yes.
Thank you. That took a while. My presentation is about how to use JSON API and what JSON API is, right? This is a beginner's presentation. I'm going to talk about some things that are lower level, and then I'm going to try to build up a little bit so you can get more of it than what you can see at other presentations or a tutorial online. So hopefully this contains new material that I haven't shown anywhere yet. My name is Mateu. I'm a Drupal fan. I started this journey on decoupling Drupal a while ago. I think it was back in 2013. I had a project that was a decoupled Drupal project, and there was almost nothing. This was Drupal 7 days. And I talked to Amitai over there, and it was in a party. Everything starts in a party.
We were drunk, maybe.
And he was drunk, I was not. And, well, anyways, went through this journey and started writing module for Drupal 8. I wrote JSON API, JSON API extras, simple auth, decoupled router, consumer image styles, a bunch of those, right? Became an API first initiative maintainer by doing all that, which means that if any of you want to collaborate and start writing things and giving back to the community, you can come to me and tell me about your ideas, and I can tell you, oh, this other person is working on that as well, why don't you join forces? Or maybe I will tell you, oh, this is a neat idea, but you will find this problem in the way. But I can work with other people to get this problem out of the way so you can progress in your ideas. So that's what an API coordinator does, an initiative coordinator does. And I also, for a living, work for Lullabot. We are a design, strategy, and development agency. We work with large-scale producers, and I came here thanks to the organization who sponsored my trip, and Lullabot is also sponsoring me to be here. So if you're appreciative of that and of all the work that they have sponsored in the past, and you have a project that is a large-scale publisher, please come talk to us, and maybe we can make that work. Today, about the presentation, I want to talk about what JSON API is, and also what the status of the Drupal project is. And finally, I'm going to talk about how to move beyond the Drupal module, which is now in Drupal core, and how to extract the most of it and kind of reach to those corners of the application that JSON API is not reaching today. So you have everything covered and you can thrive with decoupled Drupal. JSON API is a specification, a REST specification, which is meant to stop conversations about how to make your API. So before we had these kind of specifications, people were arguing about how do we make the JSON object of this entity or this database record? How do we use the key as a field name and the value as the value for it? Or do we have like an array of JSON objects and each one has field name column, the name of the field, and value column, the value of the field, etc. So a lot of effort went into that. Then JSON API comes in and says, okay, any solution works here, we know that, but let's come with one solution so we can agree on it and stop deciding and start working. And as a benefit of that, we have now a common shape of what our objects, JSON objects, the representations of our data, and this is not exclusive of Drupal. JSON API specification works in other lands like for your Symfony apps, your Node.js apps, whatever server can have implemented JSON API. And they have a common structure. We'll talk about it later. And it also defines how you interact with it via the URL and the HTTP requests that you make to the server. It was developed by a set of strongly driven front-end developers and UX experts, which means that it is meant to be used, right? It's not some purist academic that was behind it that wanted to express their satisfaction as something very well defined, but someone that was building JavaScript applications and was finding problems with the way that they were interacting with APIs, and they wanted to solve them. And these were very smart people, way smarter than I am. So the next question is, well, this is not the only specification, right? There are many out there. This is just a random list of different specifications. And there is also GraphQL. Why this one? Why not, for instance, Halp, which used to come with Drupal core? Well, the answer is that this one is very popular in the tools that already interact with it. So you can have a Symfony application, and you will have a project that generates a JSON API out of this, right? An API that conforms to the JSON API spec out of this. For Node.js, the same thing. And for all the server technologies, you will probably have some starter kit at the least that generates the API for you. And on the other side, for the consumer applications, the JavaScript applications, Android applications, you will also have clients that know about this format and make you go faster on it. So this was one of the reasons. And another reason was that back when I chose in 2013 to use JSON API, it solved all the problems, and GraphQL wasn't available, and I just made the choice, and I was very lucky. I chose the right one. Another good reason to choose JSON API is that it prescribes a lot of things, but it doesn't go too far into it. It acknowledges that some server implementations will have limitations and differences that make it important that everyone can describe the API in their own terms. Like, for instance, the JSON API specification says that there is a keyword called filter that is used to limit the number of records that come out of a collection, right? But it doesn't say anything else. Like what, and people working with JSON API or implementing JSON API, the first thing that they ask is, well, what do I put inside of that filter keyword, right? Well, it depends. Like, for instance, a custom-built Node.js server may just want to expose one type of filter, right? So it would be like filter, I don't know, article name, and then equals the article name. In Drupal, we have Entity API, which is a very powerful filtering framework inside of Drupal, and we decided to extend the JSON API specification to include what we can do with Entity Query API. And that means that if you follow the documentation, there is a very structured way of using that filter keyword. But that filtering structure is internal to Drupal, and it may vary. The only common thing is that everyone is using the filter keyword. So, again, the JSON API specification is flexible enough to give you room to go into the specifics of your implementation. And that's a good thing. Another good thing is that when you conform to a specification, to a standard, you can just give a link to the documentation to people. Because everything is very well documented, and you don't have to write it. You don't have to maintain the documentation, and you don't have to talk over and over again and fix things whenever you find a problem with your API, go and change the documentation. So that's a nice feature too. JSON API has the answers as well to the most common problems when using REST APIs. And we'll talk about this later, but I want to introduce the problems first. All right. The transport format. I'm going to talk about, and first I want to say, I'm going to make available the slides to everyone as a PDF, so you need to take pictures or anything like that. So let's talk about what it looks like, right? Because we've been talking about, like, in general, what it is, what are the features. I have encoded in colors the different parts of the JSON document. You'll see that in blue we have the part of the document that identifies the resource. The resource could be a database record, it could be an entity in Drupal, and something that is identifiable. So the blue parts will talk about how to find that in the server. Then the green part is the actual data. For an article, it will be the title, the description, the tags, the images. So it would be article and description are attributes, tags and images are relationships, because they are pointers to all the things. And finally, there is metadata, which is unstructured data that talks about the data, which is a kind of an ethereal concept, and links, Hypermedia, which is a common REST concept that we'll touch on a little bit later as well. Finally, in pink, I put some kind of glue code, like it's a structure that you need to put all these parts together in the same JSON document. So it looks like this. You find the article number 1. This is the way that you go to the server and say, okay, it's this thing. Go load it and give it back to me. And then the data and the hypermedia and the links, right? Zooming into the attributes is just key and value, title and body, and then you have the values there. And the relationships, as they are pointers to other things, you have all the colors again inside of a relationship. And here you can see that relationship tags is an array of things, right, that you need to identify in the server. So that's why you have like the blue part here. This is the important part. And notice that inside of here, inside of the data of the tags, you don't have the green, right? And that may not be convenient. We'll see how we get that data, right? But it's not going to be inside of the relationship objects. The JSON API specification, it also talks about how you interact with the resources. This is like the shape of the things that you push to the server or you get from the server. If you're writing an article, if your application is writing an article, which is something that we don't talk about very often. Decoupled applications that are writing, but they do exist. I've seen them. And we are going to talk about how we talk about resource interaction, right? This is just mainly REST, right? Which means that the server understands HTTP, get, put, post, patch, and delete methods. And if you're not very familiar with that, get means read, post means create, patch means change, and delete means remove. It looks like this. It's basically, it's very simple. You access a URL, in this case articles, and since articles for the server may mean, oh, you're requesting the articles, HTML page, we need to specify, no, I don't want HTML. I want JSON API. And that's why we pass the header accept application BND API JSON. I didn't decide application BND API JSON, right? It's a little bit too long to my taste, but that's what the designers or the editors of the specification chose. And the common problems are of HTTP 1.1 applications, because there's someone that always mentions HTTP 2 and 3 now, I guess, is that typical REST applications go back and forth to the server too many times, and that is a problem because of performance. And they also complain that they always bring the whole thing, and they can specify, I don't want all the fields of an article, I don't care about the moderation state of the tag entity, right? Just don't give me that, because that makes the response grow in size, and it's slower to come back to me. And finally, there is a problem of, well, how do I find this article? Because we said before, go and find article and ID 1, but how do I find that ID, right? How do I know that? And that's content discovery. And they have known solutions. The solutions are embedding resources inside of the initial request. So you say, give me the article along with all the data that's related to it. And we also solve the bloated responses with sparse fieldsets, which means that you specify the fields that you want back, and collections and filters serve you to find the content. So think about this extremely simple example. If you had this example, you shouldn't be going with a decoupled application. But for the sake of the implementation, let's think about it, right? So we have a blog. My friend Paco has a blog about vegan food, and he starts implementing his blog, and he goes for decoupled Drupal. And the first thing that he's doing it with traditional REST, and he needs to get the article with the author of the post, the image of it, the name, then the image of the article, the description of the article, then the name of the tags, and then comments. And again, the author of the comment and the image of the comment. So the very first thing that he does is he makes a request to article 12. And here in indentation, you can see the things that are sequential, and the things that are at the same indentation level, you can do in parallel. So you first start with article 12, and it comes back. And you know, okay, now I know that I need to request the author number 34, tags, then the comments. I need to request the comments, and then when the author comes back, I know that I need to request the image number 5, etc., etc. So those are a lot of requests. And the worst part is that several requests need to wait for one to go back and forth, and then you realize, oh, I need to make another request, and then another request. So those are the harmful, and not just the sheer number of requests. So Paco talks to me, and I say, no, forget about it. Just use JSON API. But what you can do instead is you go to article 12, and in the same request you say, but wait, also when you, because the server knows about the relationships, also include the author image, the tags, the comment author, and the comment author image. And the server brings all that together, creates a big document, and in just one go, it gives you all the information.
That was not intended.
Okay, what did I do? All right. The next thing is that, well, that document is too big. So he says, maybe I don't want everything in the article response, and I only want the title and creation date. You can do that in the initial request. You add this fields keyword, and you say, okay, the fields for anything that's an article are title and creative. And the server will remove everything else and will only give you the thing that you need. the intent here is to show how you can find content, right? Imagine that in another application, and now we leave this blog example, we are building a music database, and you have this query for an Android app wants to display the cover image and the publication year of all of the albums, of all of the bands, having one of the members under 35 and currently living in Murcia, which is a city in Spain, right? And while you're at it, you give me the name of the band and the name of the member as well. So in here, you realize that, okay, so this is related to, I'm going to start on bands, and I'm going to limit the bands that we have to only the ones that have members living in that city younger than 35. And then for those bands, I'm going to go grab the albums and the album covers, and I'm going to then respond back to the user. So this is a pretty complex query, right? But with JSON API in Drupal, you can specify that query in the URL in a simple way. In here, we're making a request to the bands, because we start in bands, and that's the difficult part. You need to know where to start your query, right? And that's going to change in every different query. But once you figure that out, you say, okay, give me all the bands, and then filter the bands by the member's city being the value that we want, and the members of the band's age needs to be less than 35. And with that, you have the bands that you care about, and now you start including, okay, and for those bands, include their albums and the cover image of their albums, and also the members. And then just to limit the number of the fields. So what we've accomplished with this is we are writing queries in a URL, and you get in one request all the data that you need, and only the data that you need. And that's the goal. And hopefully this URL query, which is, if you think about it, is exactly the same that GraphQL later on started doing, right? Instead of having the URL in the query in the URL, they have their special format that looks like JSON, but it isn't exactly JSON, to convey this information. Because again, this is a known solution. This is not something that we came up with, right? This is how you do stuff. But the idea is that now every consumer application, every JavaScript app, every Android app can decide what data needs they have. And because it's not the same accessing your Android app than the desktop side sometimes, right? Look into, I don't know, a hotel searcher, right? You have a different experience depending. So now, since everyone can decide what data they need and only get the data that they need, you can fulfill these designs and the features that come with it, and you get paid because you get the job done, which is important. Another thing about JSON API is that it has additional endpoints to simplify your life. Go read on this on the documentation. I'm not going to go into this because it isn't terribly used, and it takes quite some time to get into the details of this. But know that they exist. There are some there are like 4 different endpoints for each resource. Another thing that I wanted to talk is about performance, and I mentioned that there are many back and forth, and that is bad for performance. So let's prove it. So this is a test I did a while ago. I'm gonna get going back to the blog example. I'm gonna get the author image and 2 tags for this particular post, and I'm going to do the same then with traditional REST. And what I'm finding is that with traditional REST, in my local host, with page cache enabled, it takes 21 milliseconds. It's not bad. However, you need to realize that it's in my local host, that it's with page cache, and it's a very simple site, right? It will definitely take more than that, because you will have to send the data maybe from Tokyo to Spain, right? And then back. And the fastest you can go is the speed of light using fiber optics, right? And if you measure that, it is more than 21 seconds. It happens to be more than 21 seconds. So this is a very optimistic, but it serves us to compare the two, because then you do the same with JSON API, and you realize, oh, this takes 7 milliseconds. Why that is because of the 3 trips to Drupal. And I made these comparisons available. When you get the slides, you'll see the whole data of the performance comparison in the different scenarios. Here, the thing is that the slowest part of a Drupal request is just a Drupal request. Sorry, there is no way around it, right? So if you can do less Drupal requests, do less of that. And in JSON API, since you only do 1 round trip, you only start Drupal once. About the Drupal module, it is now in Drupal core, as you may know, starting on 8.7, and in 8.8 it got a lot faster. It was very fast before, and now it's even faster. And some things about the Drupal implementation is that we turn entities into resources, but we turn every entity type and bundle into 1 resource, which means that you get 1 resource for articles and 1 resource for pages, even though they are both nodes, right? And that is because all articles have the same set of fields, and all pages have all the same set of fields, but pages and articles don't have to have the same fields, right? So we like resources that everything inside of that resource, everything inside of articles have the same fields. That makes for a very nice and homogeneous set of responses. The URLs look like that: JSON API, entity type, and bundle name. And everything is automatically exposed when you enable the module, except for the things that the entity type developer said this should never be exposed through JSON API. There's a way to do that, and maybe the developer in Drupal core decides that, or maybe the developer in Contrib, or maybe you do when writing your own custom entity types. But there is no way to say, well, this may or may not expose. If may or maybe not, then you expose it, right? And you can do any entity query filter using the JSON API module in core, which is pretty cool. But how do you expand it? Well, the first thing that you need to do is to add JSON API extras, which allows you to disable resources. Those resources that may or may be not used, then you can disable them using JSON API extras. Gives you a nice UI, and you go click, and it's gone. The same goes for fields. What if you, inside of the page resource, you want to disable the content translation source field because you don't care about that in your API? Well, you can disable that field as well. You can also change names of things. If you don't like /JSON API /node/page, you want to rename it to /pages, you can do that. If you don't like that Drupal puts field underscore and then something else, you can rename fields as well. So JSON API Extras gives you flexibility in your JSON API, which is a very inflexible out of the box because it's meant to be very easy to get started with, right? Zero configuration. JSON API Cross Bundles is another module that may be interesting if you need to have all nodes listed together. I said that JSON API doesn't have a way to list articles and pages together. This module makes it possible, right? Only very few sites will actually need this. You may think that you need it, but you probably don't. But there are a few sites that do, and especially those that deal with commerce and things like that. They may find this interesting.
How am I doing on time?
JSON API Hypermedia, and if you want to pay attention to just a part of the presentation, please do pay attention on this. Right? This is the interesting part. JSON API Hypermedia allows you to inject links into the responses of your JSON API objects. Right? What that means is that the server is the one that knows about the business logic of your application. And it encodes that business logic or behaviors into the returned data. That is very confusing, I agree. So let's try to think about it a little bit more. So imagine that you're getting data for a product, right? You make a request to your API and you return a product. And JSON API Hypermedia allows you to inject links. So what you do is you create a link that is called add to cart. And that's something that a backend developer in your particular project writes, right? Or maybe there is a contrib module for it. But typically, the person that knows about your business logic is the person working on the project, right? So you create the add to cart link, and you say, every time that you see a product, or that you send data about a product, also put the add to cart link. And in the add to cart link, you're going to put an href or a URL to the /purchases, because you want to purchase the product. And you're going to say that is a rel type add, which means that you're creating a purchase. This add rel type is going to transform in the client-side application, because the client is going to take this link and he's going to put it in the page. Because the client needs to be very dumb here. The client doesn't need to know anything about the server. And here it says, oh, I see a link. I'm going to paint a button that says add to cart, right? With the URL purchases, and since it's a rel type add, I'm going to make a post request. So let's zoom on that link a little bit. Additionally to what I showed, you can also pass parameters. And in this case, we are passing, okay, this link is to build a button, right? And I'm going to pass a title, a confirmation text, and this is things that you decide. There is no structure to it. This is a contract that you write between the server and the front end, right? So you can put here whatever you want, as long as the client, the JavaScript application or the iOS app knows how to render these rel types, then you can change this and make new contracts. So you will have different types of hypermedia. But in this case, we are building a buy now button, right? And you're saying, this is the title of the button, this is the confirmation text that you're going to click, or you're going to show when someone clicks on it. And finally, this is the data that you're going to send back in the post request to the server, right? Pretty powerful. What if the server runs out of that product? because someone just bought the last item. Cool. Then the server, instead of sending the link to buy now, sends a link to add to your wish list or save for later. And the client doesn't care. As a client, as a JavaScript app, I don't care if you have items or not in the server, available in the server. You send me a link, I will render it. And if you change the URL, I don't care. I will render whatever you tell me to render. And that is how powerful this is, because now you can include new server-side logic, and this is what you call HTOAS, Hypermedia as the state of the application. I missed something in that acronym, but what it means is that the server is what keeps the state of the application. The important part is that we don't have the client-side application check on the stock of that product. The server knows about the stock and tells the client app what it needs to render, tells about the presentation. And we don't have to have a JavaScript app saying, okay, this is a product. I'm going to render the product page using all the data here. I know the presentation logic because I'm the client app, and that's what the client consumer knows about. And oh, it's a product. I need to render a buy now link to a place, but I also need to go and check with the server if this is available, because if this is not available, then I need to render a different item, a different button to a different URL that does a different thing, right? And that is very cumbersome, and you need to be duplicating this logic on every consumer, and using this alternative with JSON API Hypermedia, you can avoid that. Since I obviously like this topic so much, I'm going to keep talking about it. So here we have a client, sorry. I'm going to show you a slide demo. In the blue part, we're going to simulate the server state, right? We're going to simulate, we're going to say, okay, we have one item available and it's not discontinued. And then we're going to see underneath that what the link would be and how the link would render side to side, right? So this is the same example that I gave. So this is rendering a buy now button, and when I click it, it's going to show, I'm sure, charge my card on file, and if I click it again, it's going to do a post request with the data that was specified in the link, right? Pretty cool. Now, let's say that we run out of that item. Automatically, when you run out, the application just renders the save for later. And we do the same thing. In this case, we don't require the confirmation, and we're done. And finally, just to show how flexible this is, we're gonna just say we discontinued this product. So now you just click on that, and the response is a completely different link. It says rel alternate, which is, instead of a post request, is a get request, and you go and you are redirected to the new version of the product, right? And the client didn't change anything. The client only needs to know how to render these different types of links. And you can then reuse that in other parts of the page if you want. All right, enough about Hypermedia. You can now stop paying attention, because, no, not really. But I want to talk about JSON API resources. Sometimes, for completion, you want to use JSON API with things that are not entities. And you can do that nowadays, but you have to build it yourself. Luckily, there is a module called JSON API Resources, which allows you to build these custom JSON API things that are not entities, like, for instance, database logs, or things that are not following the patterns of the JSON API module or building URLs, like, for instance, JSON API/me, right, to get the currently logged in user, right? This module, JSON API resources, which I didn't write, gives you these helper functions to go faster on creating this. Otherwise, it's a little bit complex to write your own custom JSON API things, but you don't need, because there are these modules. Finally, and to finish the presentation, I'll mention Open API, which is something that I will talk about later in the last presentation of today, and is a way to describe APIs in a JSON document that can be understood by other software and machines, and that is being used to generate automatic documentation. And we'll see how that is interesting and how you can drive business value from that as well. But OpenAPI, there is a module for Drupal. You install it, and you get beautiful documentation for your JSON API, because it's integrated with JSON API. And that's it for me. These are just the links. If you like the theme of the presentation or the picture that I put there, it's all Creative Commons. And since I like these people, they enable my presentations. These are the links. Ta-da!
Have a question?
I have a question.
Okay.
First, thank you for the model, Mateu, and the presentation. So you showed the example of the blog post of Paco, for example. And when Paco would like to get the image for a comment, let's say, of the author, then there is some Drupalism going over there in the sense that a comment is referencing a file entity, and the file entity is referencing the actual file. So you have some extra layers that you need to go over. I consider it Drupalism. The question is, how would you be able to alter the response to remove those layers of Drupalism? Meaning, if I'm asking for an image, I want to get the image and not the entity reference.
All right. So the question is, how do you alter the responses to get out of the way useless things that Drupal puts in there for you in the data model?
That's right. Or if you would recommend it even, I don't know, like how do you see it?
No, I wouldn't recommend it. You may not like the data model that the media ecosystem creates for you, right? And that's fair. Sometimes I don't like it either, but there are use cases where you need that intermediate entity, and the fact is that it exists, and bypassing it would be like a special case. And one of the things that the JSON API spec says is that there needs to be full traceability of relationships, and if you skip one, you are violating that principle. You could fake it, but it's just a lot of work in the back end, and the benefit in the front end is smaller, I would say. So I see your point, but it's just too hard for the benefit to figure out. However, how I've been doing it, because this is done through image styles, right? When you have that image, but you want to apply image styles, you can have in JSON API extras, something that I didn't mention in the interest of time. You can have field enhancers, which are additional processors to the output of the field. What I would do is in the field of the author, I would put in the metadata. I mentioned that the yellow part of it, that you can have unstructured data there. I would put the links there, like the links to the actual file asset with the image style applied to it.
So the links is where you get to abuse, quote or unquote, some of the data?
Not the links, but the metadata property. But yes, it's like at the same level. Yeah, it's where the stuff happens.
Not unrelated to that, is there any introspection for the schema of your content model? Because one of the problems with JSON, large structured JSON objects that come back, is that you don't know what fields are there, what type they are, and that sort of thing. So schema, or is there feedback for saying, if I ask for this article, what fields will I get? Because that will give you the ability to be a lot more flexible about communication.
Yes, there is. Problem with schema is how you convey it in a standard form. The current standard is OpenAPI. You install the OpenAPI module, and it will give you the different routes. It will give you like /pages, and in /pages we support put, post, and get. If you do a get to /pages, you'll get an array. Each item of the array is an object. That object contains a field title, which is a string. It contains a field body, which is a string. It contains a field tags, which is an array of objects with a type string and an ID string. So with OpenAPI, you can get that, and you can also add JavaScript libraries that turn that JSON array or that JSON response of the schema into a nice clickable documentation. And if you install Contenta CMS, you can see an example of that running in your local. So yes, there is a way to get the schema. You can also install JSON API schema if you like it raw.
I like it raw.
There you go. So JSON API schema didn't make it to the presentation, but it exists.
Your content model and
yes, it's a way to introspect the content model, and it's an incredibly important part that many are not paying attention for. So yes, I would recommend it.
Thank you.
I feel that Amitai has another question.
I do, but we'll do it personally.
Okay. Thank you again.